So let me start by first, welcoming you all here and telling you a bit about why we're here. We have a particular intent around trying to open up our own thought process behind Tableland and how we're thinking about addressing the challenges of Web3 and the internet. We've always been so deeply inspired by other projects and the people that have built protocols and have really pioneered the new ways of thinking about the internet and connectivity and services and markets and all these really interesting concepts that we thought the best way to open up our thinking was just invite those people in and have some conversations to learn what inspired them, how did they get started, what challenges did they face, what challenges do they see. And so this will be a bit of a series, and I hope that the conversation series leaves kind of breadcrumbs for projects that come after us, highlighting those strategies, pitfalls, and even the inspiration for building a new internet. And I think we'll explore topics, from how we decide what we build, how we get inspired with what to build, protocol design, community building, making a positive impact in the world, all of those things, and really just bring people in to think about it and talk about it. And so today, our first session, I'm so delighted to have Juan Benet, the founder of Protocol Labs, join us. Protocol Labs are the creators of IPFS and Filecoin. And Juan is by far one of the most innovative thinkers in Web3. And he's a true pioneer. He was very early in this space thinking about these problems. And also he's just this generous fountain of good ideas, and he freely gives them all the time in the space. And so if you're listening to him, you can generally pick up a good project idea and run with it. So if you aren't familiar with IPFS or Filecoin, I just want to share two distinct data points to give you an idea of the scope and impact of these projects. So a recent sample I was reading about NFTs on Ethereum, and the basic finding here I wanted to share is that the majority of NFTs on Ethereum are backed by files on being served over IPFS. So everything that you think that is happening amazing in NFT space right now, you can think that behind the scenes, there's a huge impact being made by IPFS. And then Filecoin, a decentralized storage network, I think a really amazing data point here is that it just passed 16 exabytes in data storage capacity. So I think that means it's closing in on 1/10 of AWS scale, but it's been live for a year and a half. So that is just astounding. But I thought it'd be really fun first to back up. There's this really great video of you from 2014 on YouTube giving a demo of IPFS to a small tech team. And the demo, for me, watching it, I watched it actually a couple of times in the last few days, and it's actually mind-blowing for a few different reasons. One is that so many of the core parts of IPFS were already conceived in this demo. So it had content routing and the DHT, it had Merkle DAGs, it had multi-hashes, you even had a web UI for pinning and all of that. And then there's this sort of bomb you drop in it, and I'll come back to that in a second. But I don't actually know when you first were thinking about these ideas, but let's say 2014. What in 2014 really gave you the conviction that this needed to exist? Because I think the world, I've watched your thinking from then through now, and I think a lot of the big ideas, the big vision have grown. But back then, what was really driving you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think most of the ideas that I put together into the first design of IPFS and what went into that demo. And by the way, this is I think the talk at SourceScript, I think
Correct,
in
yeah.
2014, right? Yeah. So I think that what went into that demo, I mostly put together in to late 2013, mid 2013, early 2014, and that sort of I kind of simmered on the ideas for about a year or so until I kind of pieced it together into the design for IPFS. However, most of the ideas that I put together into that were from other prior work. So it's a lot of kind of looking at other amazing systems and remixing a lot of the ideas that were really good there, but for whatever reason weren't successful, or a lot of successful ideas that just kind of worked really well that you can then kind of recompose. So I think some salient ones are there's this first of all, like the use of hash functions to address information. Like I first really got a sense of them and learned about them through Git. I think Git taught me a ton about how these systems can work and the benefits of hash linking and content addressing and so on. And then BitTorrent is a way of kind of serving things peer-to-peer. Also, the design of Skype also influenced this a lot, where you had sort of like supernodes able to do a lot of the work to kind of maintain a peer-to-peer network. And file systems like the Andrew file system, AFS, I think it was like Carnegie Mellon file system, and then NFS. There's like a long history of distributed file systems trying to, a lot of the ideas that went into IPFS. And so it was, and then one notable one that was SFS, the secure file system, which was not like super successful in terms of wide usage, but it was super successful in terms of inspiring tons of other systems. Like it inspired things in IPFS, things in Tahoe Labs, things in a lot of other systems. So I think like a lot of these ideas, I've been kind of reading about and learning about for like, I don't know, 5 years before making IPFS. And at that point, I kind of sort of like pieced them together into this. And I was kind of like really motivated at the time by trying to accelerate science. Like there were all these really annoying problems in data distribution for scientists, like just scientists, even today, like it's kind of frustrating that like, I don't know, I spent like 8 years working on this now and like, or I think it's more now. Yeah, around 8 years. And we've certainly made it better to move around data, but we haven't yet solved the core problem, which is that like scientists spend a huge fraction of their time wrangling data and like moving it around and reformatting it and redistributing it and moving, they have to pay like various costs to like store it and so on, or like move the computation to their data and so on. And so kind of like what was motivating me at the time was to kind of create a kind of version controlled peer-to-peer way of addressing all data. It's kind of like a GitHub for data type of thing. It's like first invent like the Git for data and then invent like the GitHub for data. It just kind of took a different path because once I sort of realized that you could take this kind of like Git plus BitTorrent thing and then expose the web to it, then you're like, whoa, this is like way bigger than Git and GitHub for data. It's like suddenly the entire web can be moved around in this in the system, and like that's like super powerful.
Yeah, and so, but that realization you must have already had before the demo, because now here's the thing that for me was just like, whoa. In Marvel movies, there's the post-credit scene, in every Marvel movie, and that's kind of their thing. Maybe you were a bit of a pioneer of that too, because in that video, there's this post-credit scene where you go like, oh, and also on this system, if we deploy it to the internet, we're going to need a way to incentivize people to store it. So I modified the Bitcoin proof of work to play with this idea I'm calling Filecoin, which incentivizes people to store the files. Yep. You even had a Filecoin logo that is definitely the predecessor of today's Filecoin logo. And that's so just for people listening, that's a year before Ethereum was live. Like the insight there is just really cool. So back then, how were you thinking that blockchains were going to unfold to enable this? Like was this a hobby, or were you like, yeah, blockchains have something totally new already, and I think I see a path here?
Yeah, so I think I got really into Bitcoin kind of in 2012, 2013. I'd seen it before, but I'd seen a lot of other cryptocurrencies come and go. If you're like, a lot of kind of computer science communities saw a lot of cryptocurrencies before Bitcoin, and I just didn't. Nobody really got why Bitcoin was going to be special, and it was kind of like the way of minting it and diffusing it into the world, that like figuring out that incentive structure was really powerful. And so I kind of been playing around with it before, but then kind of like once it managed to break through the use cases and got a lot of people using it, that's when it got like super interesting, and that's when I started getting into Bitcoin. And so it always seemed to me that like eventually some cryptocurrency would figure it out, and the world would move into this kind of cryptocurrency operated set of systems. And so at the time it was like, oh, great. Like, the idea the kernel of the idea started with, oh, great. And, maybe you get people to use IPFS, and you incentivize the content distribution with Bitcoin because you need to pay for something. And it always bothered me that in BitTorrent and Skype, you had this like sharing structure that wasn't fairly compensating the participants, where you had this like huge asymmetry between the parties that provided the content and provided the service versus the parties consuming it. And so it always seemed like a problem space, kind of like ripe for markets to come into and kind of fix that. And so kind of like that was like a very natural extension to say, okay, great, like this is now with cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, we can suddenly start incentivizing the distribution of content. So great, let's kind of add Bitcoin payments to IPFS. But then what I got really frustrated by was like the proof of work waste at the time was, minuscule compared to what it is now. But even then it was already kind of like clear that this was going to be a huge problem for the world and that we should just move off of this super wasteful proof of work. And instead try to do something really useful. And then kind of like as I thought about more, as I thought about the incentive structures of Bitcoin more, kind of like the beauty of the power lottery in a sense, like this kind of structure where you're providing valuable service to the network and you're earning a share of whatever is going to be minted in the following blocks. Like that is so valuable as an incentive structure idea that once I kind of like got it, I was like, wow, this is huge. This is going to enable us to build a massive scale storage network like really fast. And even then I already knew that like all we had to do was kind of come up with the right way to solve the proof of storage problem so that you could hook it up into that kind of incentive mechanism to then amass a storage network, the scale of, Google and Amazon and like the biggest cloud storage providers. And so I knew then like 2014 that this was like basically going to happen. And I sort of started trying to develop both at the same time. So I kind of refined a lot of the ideas on paper and kind of talking to people about them over time, 2013, 2014. And then eventually kind of like decided to go build this. And kind of the part of the motivating factor was also seeing kind of like the beginnings of a bunch of other crypto networks like Ethereum and others, like they were just getting started around the same time. I remember hanging out with Vitalik and so on before Ethereum, kind of like when he was working on colored coins and talking to Gavin and so on once they started working together on the beginnings of Ethereum. Just like this neat little detail where for a hot second we were almost gonna like make the same peer-to-peer network at the time. Like we were like, oh great, let's take the peer-to-peer layer that I was building on IPFS and like use that for Ethereum. And so we initially sort of like tried to make it work, but like the team sort of were kind of running in their own pace and working on different parts of the problem. So Ethereum 1 and IPFS use different networks. Then later we kind of extracted liquidity out of IPFS and made it like really accessible and usable. And then that became kind of the foundation for Polkadot and then ETH2. And so like now, sort of like that dream finally became a reality. Like,
yeah, it's another page in that catalog of innovations. And I didn't want to get into P2P exactly, but yeah, it's totally such an impactful one in its own right. So let's fast forward a bit now. I don't know when Protocol Labs kind of came along in that thinking, but you have these potentially internet changing protocols. They're sort of like in the early stages, figuring out their use cases and what kind of people are going to adopt them. But you found Protocol Labs to usher them into existence. Can you explain a bit about Protocol Labs and how you think about its role in the universe?
Yeah, so I started Protocol Labs then to sort of be an organization to house the development of IPFS, Filecoin, and related protocols. And I went through YC with it because at the time, Sam Altman had put out this like really exciting call for much more serious technology-oriented companies. Before that, I think YC had been very focused on software as service startups and so on, or like predominantly had been that. And Sam's like YC call was, calling for like innovations in transportation and energy, and mentioned like fusion directly, mentioned supersonic planes, mentioned blockchain systems and whatnot. I don't know if it was called blockchain at the time. It was like maybe Bitcoin related or something. But that was like really exciting. It kind of showed that there was like this breath of fresh air in Silicon Valley as potentially now doing much more hardcore innovation or back into kind of like the Silicon Valley roots. That really kind of like helped me kind of start the company up and kind of provide like the first capital that I could use to like actually do this full time and hire people to work on it and so on. It was very clear to me that I needed to raise some capital in order to be able to fund it, because I went around earlier talking to professors in universities is potentially doing a PhD along and build IPFS as part of that, or potentially going to a large company like Google or something. And both of those paths seemed completely untenable at the time. It was just kind of like, this is like where those ideas would have gone to die completely.
Yeah.
And so I just was like, okay, great, I have to figure it out and like have to raise money for this and build a company and whatnot. That's how PL started.
So who were the first people that got it? How did you convince them?
For Filecoin, I think like the first people sort of like got it were close friends that kind of were also looking at it at Bitcoin and so on, but they also weren't, they didn't have money to invest in something like this. But it gave kind of like the confidence that people were going to get this. And YC really, to their credit, didn't quite get where this was going to go. But Sam especially, like, I remember like him saying, hey, I don't know if this is going to work. This sounds kind of crazy, but if it works, it's going to be massive. So let's do it.
Yeah. So PL Protocol Labs now, has this mission to drive breakthroughs in computing. And I was thinking about that a little bit, because I think in your vision for PL, IPFS and Filecoin are chapters along the way, and that there's a lot more to come still. And I was thinking about how a company does that, or how an organization does that. And for me, like even Web3, it takes these unexpected turns every year. It's like people think they've figured out what it's going to do and what blockchains are capable of. And then next year, some totally unexpected use case is going to come about that's going to be the next driver of the next wave of adoption and the next, funding and everything. That's really hard to build kind of a robust predictive model in your own head about where the world's going. I'm curious, like from a few years ago, how has PL's thinking evolved? How's your thinking evolved about, where the right places to focus are?
Yeah, great question. So I think I'll give like a short view into kind of the arc there. So I started PL with sort of like the intention of housing a number of these protocols. And I had like this vague desire to kind of fix a problem that I understood at the time, but hadn't really articulated very well, which was there seemed to be this huge problem in getting important discoveries into production use cases. Meaning, I could read the literature, and you can find an early talk that I gave in 2015, I think, at I think this was at Stanford, where I talk about this, where you have like this massive buildup of important discoveries in scientific literature, where we know how to do tons of things way better, but they aren't diffusing into the world for some reason. And it seemed like this huge gap. And at the same time, this was around the era where there's a lot of kind of talk about innovation slowing down and whether or not like we're keeping up with the rate of innovation, and maybe like the world of computers is going really fast, but everything else is slowed down. And sort of like my takeaway from a lot of that was it's very clear that the world has slowed down and there's something going wrong about R&D that is causing this. And I sort of kind of left a placeholder there of saying, hey, I want to kind of try and build a company, the kind of company that I could have gone to and said, hey, I want to go build IPFS and Filecoin. Can I get some support to go do this in a way where like that is much more kind of R&D oriented than maybe like traditional investors might be, or anything like that. And that was kind of like the vague perspective. And PL sort of took a backseat for years. I was very focused on first IPFS. I thought that I was going to end up building Filecoin in 2015, but at the time, I think there was like a Bitcoin cycle crash where a lot of interest in blockchain sort of like dried up for a while, and a lot of people were building. So Ethereum was building, others were building, and there was a lot of adoption of the early beta for your alpha, I guess. This is the alpha for IPFS. And so that kind of like pushed us to just focus on IPFS for a couple of years. And we then later came back to build Filecoin and launch it. And so during that time, PL sort of like took a backseat and became kind of the organization that helped support the teams of people building IPFS and Filecoin and kind of related systems like LiquidP and so on. But the long-term goal was to kind of build an organization that could solve this kind of R&D problem. It was like really help break the bottleneck and understand why that bottleneck is there in the first place, and to try to accelerate breakthroughs. And more recently, over the last maybe for 2 to 4 years, especially the last year or two, my attention has been, and a lot of people's attention has turned to much more actively work on how to drive breakthroughs in computing more generally. And that means like not just Web3, but other interfaces like VR and AR systems or BCI and AI and so on. Those are like whole other conversations. So I'll just kind of like leave it at that there. But then also the other part, which is how can you use mechanism design that, you know, so dramatically successful in crypto to maybe solve some of the problems in the R&D pipeline? How can you accelerate the breakthroughs themselves by building some mechanisms to kind of incentivize much better, much faster science and much better like R&D discovery processes, and then, you know, very early, like way before there's kind of a product or a company to build or even a crypto network to build. And so like that's kind of like where a lot of PL is headed over time.
Yeah, I heard you recently talking about, I think it was at the Sustainable Blockchain Summit, you were talking about impact markets. And you and I have actually spoken a few times about markets, just kind of playing around with ideas. I think at Textile, I'd been thinking maybe there'd be some cool things we could play around with marketplaces. And so I was kind of digging into that. But impact markets, you're bringing up the impact markets at that conference. It was pretty obvious you're psyched about markets in general. And do you think, you know, like purely from a PL protocol lab stance, do you think that excitement around markets stems, I think you kind of just gave a clue, but stems purely from blockchain innovations? Or do you think there's something else going on that makes markets interesting that could be useful outside of blockchains, but to drive innovation, to drive impact, to drive contributions to science, to drive contributions to sustainability, things there?
Yeah. So I think all of these things are primitives for coordination. There's a great meme that the Gitcoin community, Kevin Owake and others are pushing recently, which is like the 2 astronaut meme, where it's like one of the astronauts is like, wait, so it's all coordination? And the other astronaut behind it is like, yes, it always has been. And so the point is like capital structures, markets, currencies, government systems, economies, organizations, even families, all of this stuff is just about coordinating. It's about coordinating groups of people, groups of organizations, groups of tribes, and so on, to solve problems together and to achieve success together. And so certainly like we should bring to bear the best of the tools that we have to coordinate people and organizations and so on to solve our biggest problems. And so I think like I've been pretty excited about the impact that just capital systems have had on climate change as an example. Like, you know, governments have been talking about solving a lot of these problems for many years, and like they've been kind of unable to cause a lot of change, except for areas where they gave like some support to R&D groups that help do cost reduction on wind, solar, and batteries, or where governments got behind, and governments, companies, and people got behind the idea of doing carbon credits on carbon capture and energy credit, renewable energy credits, and so on. And those systems have these like tremendously powerful levers to shift behavior, because they sort of plug in really nicely to the existing incentive structures of the whole system and provide a really fast upgrade path. So like, I'm way more optimistic that we'll solve the planetary scale climate change problems by building way fairer and correct and better market systems, because they'll just plug into the existing coordination systems better. Like the world has massive scale in coordination structures for how people and companies and governments all work in like the massive supply chain and the massive economic structures. If you make something that like just plugs into that entire system, makes it coordinate well, it's kind of like fitting a protocol that already exists. You ideally don't want to start from scratch. And if you do that well, then you can coordinate massive scale change. And so I think like impact certificates and impact markets are like one example of a whole category of things that we need to be exploring.
So just digging in there, because I've been having this thinking, and it kind of gets to that question of is it markets, or is it blockchains that enable markets in a different way? So like the Sustainable Blockchain Summit again is this really interesting example that was highlighting kind of this scenario of events. So basically blockchain and the projects behind blockchain weren't paying much attention to sustainability, and then they were. And now I'm pretty confident that the most important innovations for sustainability and climate change are going to come out of blockchain. And like I'm really excited about some of the things going on there. And I suspect that you agree with this more or less. But the question I have is like, why was this community in particular able to take such a left turn so efficiently? Like even Filecoin, I saw Paul Graham tweeted the other day that he was psyched how Stripe had a chief climate officer. And I was like, oh, I think Filecoin has more or less that same role for a while now, and how innovative that is. And but why was this community able to go like, yeah, that's a really important topic. Actually, we should dedicate a lot of effort there. Is it capital? Is it abundance of capital? Is it these non-hierarchical organizations where people are choosing to work on what's important? Like, what is making it this possible?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a few factors. Like, first and foremost, I think it's like a set of people who understand the problem and have been really passionate about solving the problem and have been trying many things, or like have been looking at potential things to do, and who then understood the power of blockchain systems and said, wow, this is a very good tool set to then go have this massive impact. A huge plug here for the Filecoin Green team that has been doing all of this work. And there's a whole set of people there who came up with a bunch of the structures here and have been kind of innovating on a lot of this. And they're thinking about it way beyond Filecoin. They're thinking about how to apply this to not only all blockchains, but all computing infrastructure, and beyond that, all energy use as a whole. And they're building on a lot of other work that people have been doing for a long time. But a lot of it is kind of like catalyzing the innovation and catalyzing a project. So I think a lot of this comes down to a set of people who are like willing to commit to doing it, and who can innovate really quickly, who can explore the landscape of ideas really fast and piece things together, try things, ship something, and keep going, and understand that like, this is kind of like what we describe at Protocol Labs as startup culture, where it's not about creating a kind of perfect solution where your write-up of it is going to stand the test of time for centuries, which is kind of like the academic way to look at it, kind of in a way. But it's instead about having the greatest possible impact towards the goal as fast as possible in kind of like the most sustainable way possible. And sustainability here is embedded into the startup ethos in terms of cash flows. Like startups by definition like will only survive if they can generate cash flows. Now sustainability, there's like two words. Like one part is sustainability of the startup versus sustainability of the environment of the startup. And the more we can align those incentives, the better the world will work. But I think a lot of it comes down to the people figuring out that something is possible, connecting the dots, and just kind of committing to doing it and committing to shipping something early, even if nobody likes it yet, or like it's so far away from success. I was talking about it with our people team. It's kind of like the sense of Kaizen, where you want to deliver continuous improvement into the system, and you want to kind of start delivering improvement as soon as you can, and then just over time learn from the system, learn from the market, learn from the environment, and feed that back to scale the operation. And so I think with Filecoin Green is a great example of that, like delivering a lot of the ideas quickly through talks and chat communications and documents, and then first early tooling that does measurements, and then from there coming up with like structures to hook up like the estimation of power use of the Filecoin network to renewable energy credits, and then like causing the actual transactions to happen, and then telling the world about it, and then telling the world how this could be applied in a larger scale to many other blockchains and to many other cloud systems and to many other industries. And so over time, I think like we'll get to like lift a massive lever here. Oh, sorry, we'll get to lift a massive weight here, but it kind of like all stems from having like the vision and the execution coupled together really well, and just kind of pressing on through kind of what might seem like insurmountable obstacles. And to a question about like what sort of like enables that kind of innovation, is like it comes down to people talking about it and people deciding to do it, resonating with each other, realizing that the time has come, refining ideas, the people working on Filecoin Green got like really excited about the potential for it, had been looking at many energy-oriented things for a while. Alan Ransell and Angie McGuire, like, and a number of other people decided like, hey, like it's time to go do this, and just pushed really hard to make the project work and to actually start turning it into a thing that would ship results on time and whatnot. I think a big part of the reason why maybe we got motivated to work on it now versus say like a year from now is that I think the big backlash against the proof of work use and the waste from Bitcoin was super helpful. I think like backlash caused the crypto community, which is usually a super kind of thoughtful, long-term oriented, visionary community that wants to make the world better. It's like very kind of regenerative crypto oriented. Maybe not the whole community operates this way, but like a very large subset thinks about regenerative crypto economics that try to make the world better. Took it very seriously and said, oh yeah, like we've known for a long time that this is like not necessary, that is a side effect. We gotta accelerate the work that we're doing. I mean, proof of stake has been an idea for many, many years, and people have been working on it for a long time to get there. Everybody kind of, not everybody, a lot of people really hate the waste that comes from the Bitcoin proof of work. But it really, that backlash really accelerated everyone's work. So it was useful. I think a problem here will be now getting everybody to understand the real positive impact that's going to come out of this, because I think like these kind of social problems tend to generate a lot of misinformation and memes that are really difficult to unwind, where like suddenly a lot of people around the world are just convinced like, oh, clearly blockchain is like destruction of the environment. It's like, no, that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, like if I had to bet right now, I'd bet way more that blockchains are going to help solve the climate crisis way faster than nation states will.
Well, kudos to Alan and Angie and everybody on the team for that work. I think it's really exceptional. I guess on the flip side of that, though, back before Filecoin was launched, I was thinking kind of deeply about it. I think I was on a hike in the Headlands, and I had this like really deep moment where I was just thinking about how blockchains are maybe the first programs that we've ever invented that we may never be able to shut off again. And I was thinking how that is they're sort of spooky like that. There's this really great talk by a researcher named James Mickens, and he just talks about security and how technologists often think that their technology is it can't do harm, and so they put it out there. And he kind of makes this argument a lot in the domain of AI research, but then they put it out there, and when you mix your incorruptible AI with all of the garbage that is the internet, like you kind of start seeing these awful things emerge. And so we need to be really thoughtful about how we actually design and deploy technologies. And I think about that a lot with blockchain. And so like what you're saying is true for sustainability, but I wonder what other gremlins are kind of underneath the surface that we might miss, or like what do you think about blockchains being spooky and what happens to this over the long run?
Yeah, it's a great question. So look, technology is a way of using what we know to create capability. It's the second part of the knowledge is power phrase, right? So knowledge is kind of the system that includes both the process of finding out more knowledge and the process of embodying that knowledge into capabilities. So it's the scientific process of coming up with new ideas, coming up with new knowledge, refining that over time, getting to a much better body of what we know, and then translating that into enhanced capabilities over the environment to then into like kind of the space, the universe or the multiverse around you to be able to kind of do more. And the classic example of this is stuff like the microscope or the telescope. You refine some knowledge about cleaning lenses, and then you can build this technology that then expands your knowledge capability, where you suddenly can see like cellular organisms or other star systems and planets, and it just expands your horizon. And so you have like this amazing self-reinforcing loop there where knowledge generation just creates like this super open-ended innovation structure. And increases power. And so that means when you increase power, though, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be for good. It could also be for bad. And we have tons of examples of that in history. Tons of innovations led to, the perfection of swords to like go around and like be able to like defend yourself more, but also attack more. Or, more recently in the 20th century, the biggest problem is nuclear weapons. And you create this technological landscape where a few nation states have the ability to like wipe out the species and many other species along with us, millions of other species along with us. And so the technology is the power part of the knowledge is power equation. And you really have to work hard to make sure that you aim for good outcomes. And this is something that the people building the technology have to do. It is, when you're building something, it is not enough to just kind of like build a technology, diffuse it onto the world and like step back. You have to work on making sure that you aim it towards good outcomes. You can shape the technology by introducing friction for bad use cases and reducing friction for good use cases to just maximize the expected value that the good outcomes are going to happen. There are certain bad things you can't prevent, like knowing about nuclear power enables the creation of both nuclear reactors for energy and including like clean nuclear and so on, but also enables the creation of nuclear weapons. And you have to like kind of, as the people building it, you have to aim in certain directions. And the physics community had this like huge reaction to the war effort, the Manhattan Project and so on, and helped get there, like helped create all of the rules about how to regulate the use of nuclear energy, how to like detect bad uses, potential bad uses about it, like the generation of nuclear weapons, how to like move the world into a standpoint where these things were not going to be used, or like ideally like would decrease the likelihood of it being used for anything bad. And for like to your point about blockchains, like I'm very worried that a lot of these systems will be used for bad things. And I think this is something that a lot of us are working on, and a lot more of us need to work on more to increase the friction towards bad use cases and decrease the friction towards good use cases. And one of the parts that makes this so hard is like you never know, it is so hard to predict how something is going to be good or bad. There's a great movie called Charlie Wilson's War that talks about how this kind of like covert campaign with a congressman and a CIA agent and this amazing businesswoman in Texas who like helped orchestrate this like the arming of the forces in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. And like the whole point of the movie is like the ending scene where people talk about like, great, so you've done this, but like, is that actually a good thing? Like, is that gonna produce like a good outcome or not? And you never know. It's extremely difficult to predict, and it requires this constant focus on making sure that things are just broadly aimed towards good outcomes. And so it's like you can't just like do your part once and then you're done. You need people and many systems to continuously try to aim for all of these things to aim for good outcomes, because the chaotic system makes it inherently difficult to predict how things are going to change, right? So for example, private money, like private cryptocurrencies is a thing that I was very on the fence about for a long time. And kind of the next horizon of that is like private smart contracts, execution over zero knowledge systems where you can do any smart contract in a way that is completely zero knowledge. These things are like extremely powerful, and they will be great forces for good and also potentially great forces for bad. And we have to be really careful about how they get implemented and distributed in the world. And so this is one of the things we're like, I was very much on the fence about like, ooh, should we even build these things? Can we create like structures that limit their impact? Can we like maybe model how much trade is happening through them and kind of like make it difficult to trade vast sums of money in a super private way? Because like maybe that's like way easier for that to go wrong. And I think like a lot of that is going to get figured out by our community over the next 2 to 3 years. And we have to do it. Like this is not a job that we can like just leave other people to do, because other people won't know what to do. It'll be too late by the time they realize like that this has to be done. It's like the people building these things today have to do the work to figure out what are like the really good use cases and how to introduce friction for the bad use cases.
I think actually it's pretty cool because this whole sustainability left turn has really proven that it is possible to see problems and quickly have the community, this collective community, change what their priorities are to make it better in a way that I think would have been hard to say was possible in these distributed systems before these clear examples where we're showing it's possible. I'm going to run out of my time with you, so I thought maybe a nice high note to leave it on would be kind of outside of what Textile's doing or outside of what Protocol Labs is doing or the Filecoin community directly is building. What's one exciting project that you think we should all be watching in Web3, whether it's a research idea or a company or a new protocol, or is there anything on your radar that you think is worth more people knowing?
Oh man, too many. Like there's just so much amazing innovation. I think like maybe the meta point here is every year I get more optimistic about the outlook for Web3 and crypto. It's like every year the composability of the layers just opens up a ton more use cases or brings forward a lot of use cases. So what ends up happening is like people have thought about and written about a lot of possibilities for many decades or centuries. And what will end up happening is some important thing will like pull forward something that maybe you thought was only going to be possible 10 or 20 years from now, and something is now possible in a year or two. Like that is super, super, super amazing. I'm personally like really excited for all of this stuff around incentive structures for innovation. And this is kind of like, we're running a conference called Funding the Commons that is kind of bringing together that community to talk about it. And there's another great conference called Shelling Point that the Gitcoin team is running. And so I'm really excited about like this kind of combined project, like the shared project of creating like these regenerative cryptoeconomic incentive structures to bring to bear all of the best of the tools of the crypto ecosystem and capital systems and other kinds of economic structures, bring to bear like the full arsenal of like game theory and mechanism design to solving planetary scale problems or interplanetary scale problems in a really kind of positive sum oriented way and trying to achieve paratopia. I'll give a plug for an amazing talk from Eric Drexler, who's the kind of like one of the main inventors and creators of nanotechnology, and who gave this talk to the effective altruist community, talking about paratopia. And he describes like this amazing vision for the future where like if you can kind of step back and realize that the world is not just it's not just not zero sum, because most people maybe at the beginning sort of like learn that things are kind of competitive and zero sum and you have to be careful and whatnot, and then you learn more and you realize, hey, it's actually not zero sum. Things can be like very positive sum, but the how positive sum part of this is like what is very difficult to understand. It's like it's not positive sum in the sense that like, hey, maybe you can collaborate and work together and maybe end up with like twice the amount of resources. No, it's like you collaborate and you work together and you end up with 10, 100, 1,000 times more resources and 1,000 times more value. And so like that kind of open-ended positive sum picture is so amazingly optimistic about our ability to kind of like solve large scale problems, solve most of the ills of the world and kind of improve the human condition, and kind of like get us to kind of like these really optimistic utopic visions of the future. So like, the huge plug for that talk. And I really think that cryptoeconomics is going to enable us to create an incentive gradient to get to that paratopia. So I think like that's probably what I'm most excited about. And plug for like all the talks from Funding the Commons, impact certificates, hyper certificates, all the Shelling Point talks, Gitcoin, the Green Pill podcast. I think like that's probably, I feel about this stuff the same way that I felt about crypto early on in like 2013, 2014 about the potential. So like, I think it has like the ability to totally change the world in like 10 years.
Cool. I mean, there's so many things I wanted to unpack more. I want to just spend 2 hours talking about impact markets and how they're going to change this. And you're thinking about how we attribute value and credit in these scientific systems and innovation systems. I want to talk to you about the future of funding. I want to talk to you about just so many things. So hopefully we can do this again, but I want to let you go so you can make your next commitment. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really great to kick off this set of conversations. Let's talk about all this stuff more in the future. And huge thank you to the whole team at PL and the many organizations and communities around IPFS, Filecoin, and so on. Like, we talked about a lot of ideas today that I get to talk about, but it really kind of took an entire village, more than a village. Like I think we're in like tens of thousands of people working across these ecosystems to build all of this out. So really, thank you so much to everybody working together, including you, Andrew, and the whole.
Yeah, I mean, let me echo that, because I mean, I think that the teams that you work with inspire us every day. So yeah, we want to thank them too. I mean, they've been amazing collaborators and really truly inspiration points for us. So thank you all.
Thank you.